Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut, and the first of a new year of Retropower Uncut. So we're going to start with this little beauty that's just arrived today. It's in the project pipeline. It's been in the project pipeline for a little while. A 309 GTI for a repeat customer. This is going to be an interesting build. It'll be our take on a 90s hot hatch, which should be an interesting little challenge for us. We've all got a bit of a soft spot for these. It's a car that I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't like, which is nice. And yeah, it'll be an interesting engine conversion. It'll be a well-trodden engine conversion. I was about to try and say that we were going to put an LS3 in it, but I've not got the. I can't keep a straight face while saying it, so I'll do a little reveal because somebody's already done the engine conversion for us initially, and it was not very original, but we'll be putting our own little touch on it. It's already got an Mi16 in it, which is the obvious conversion. We will be continuing that theme, but much more so. So standard injection system will all be gone. All of that will be thrown in the bin. There'll be a lot of more exotic bits in the engine, and it'll be putting out a lot more power. I'm not going to say a number without talking to Cal first, but I would imagine north of 250 horsepower, hopefully more towards the 300 mark. But we've got to discuss that in terms of tractability as well, and the actual use the car's going to get. I'm not fully au fait with the whole spec, the actual final spec of all parts of this car, so I'm not going to elaborate on it too much because I know that my brother's been talking to the customer on this, and he's actually away this week. So I'm not going to go into too much on it, but the bulk of it will be very simple, very faithful to the original idea of the original principle of the car, which was basically lightness with enough luxury to make it comfortable and less of a tin box, but without losing the lightness, which is what made these cars great to drive and just such good fun. So yeah, this is going to be a nice project. It's just going to be into the very start of the blasting and metalwork pipeline very soon. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we've said this before with the Land Cruiser, there shouldn't be too much metalwork with it. These reasonably unmolested versions of this era of Peugeot were very rot resistant. I'm hoping this one's it fits that mould. I haven't even I haven't even looked around it. I've not had a chance, so I've no idea whether this is fairly rot-free. I imagine it is. Looking at it, I don't think it'll be too bad. So yeah, this is going to be an exciting project. Everyone here is extremely enthusiastic about it. So watch this space, and we'll be able to see a retro-powered 90s hot hatch develop. Well, following on from the 90s hot hatch, we'll move on to a 70s hot saloon, I suppose. Probably a 70s equivalent. Long-term watchers and observers of Retropower will probably be familiar with this car. It's one we built, I'm stretching my memory now a little bit, a year and a half or so ago this was finished. Yeah, around a year and a half ago I believe this was finished. Off the top of my head, again, memory plays up. Age isn't on my side when it comes to memory. But yeah, we finished this some time ago. It's come back for a sort of an annual fettle. There's a couple of things to do on it. It had a very short diff ratio. When it was originally built, the car was originally, obviously it was built as an RS2000. It was converted at 0 miles, I believe it was at 0 miles, certainly thereabouts, to a Group 2 rally spec. At that point, it had a 4.1 diff fitted to it. It's on a Baby Atlas axle with a 4.1 diff. So again, originally it was all bought from the RS dealer shopping list of parts. The car was never really used as a road car. It was used. It's one owner from new. The owner brought it to us to restore it back to new. He bought it originally. He then had it converted to flat front and had it built as a rally car as a new car. It was taking, straight to an RS dealership and converted straight away when it was new, and we've then rebuilt that car back for the original owner. So it's one that again was very close to all our hearts. But it had a Baby Atlas 4.1 diff in it with a 4-speed box, and that does make it a little bit hard work on the road. It's a little bit too short to be practical. So I haven't actually checked the ratio. Again, I've been not involved in the discussion there, but I know it's got a 3.9. It's got another diff sat in the boot, which I believe is a 3.9. So we're going to be changing the diff in it. Service and various other checks, and then the carbs need looking at. There was a bit of an issue on progression on the carbs when it was first built, which there was a bit of discussion backwards and forwards between engine builder and us, and at the time it didn't get resolved. It's possible to drive around it, but it's a bit of a pain. So that's just getting resolved as well while the car's here. We're going to get the carbs off and check out what the issue is with the carbs. Probably have the car on the rollers and just resolve that issue on the carburetors while it's here. And again, a basic bit of maintenance and checking over and making sure it's fit for a bit of use. Again, a repeat customer. We've actually got another project in the waiting list for this customer, which again, you'll have to watch this space. That's about 2 years down the line. But yeah, another car that we all absolutely love here. There's a nice photograph actually on the project page. Again, people who are watching this will probably be aware that with a couple of exceptions, every project that we do has a Facebook page. So this car has its own Facebook page, and on that Facebook page you'll find there's a photo, sadly lacking in me because I wasn't here that day, but most of our staff lined up with the owner and his son who jointly restored this car. Jointly brought this car to us to restore, and there's a nice lineup with them all outside our reception, taking delivery of the car when we finished it. So it's another vehicle that's very close to our hearts. So yeah, really nice to see it back for a bit. Wandering along, we'll quickly skip through the assembly shop. There's been various progress on various things, but a lot of it's been concentrated on a car I can't tell you about, so we'll skip over that. But just quickly pausing in here, more workshop bits. We finally got sorted our new tool cabinets, which you can see along that wall. We've now got 30 tool cabinets, which were, as usual with our way of doing things, we don't have pots of money to splash about. They were bought used from a factory that was closing down. So they're now our new, gradually being repopulated. I'm trying to declutter and sort out, and we're gradually getting through putting things in all those cupboards now and trying to get the place all organised and sorted out. But we're progressing slowly on that, amongst trying to get work done as well. So that's the situation on in the assembly shop. That's coming together gradually and nicely. Wandering along from there, we'll move through to the fabrication shop, because there's a few bits to pick up in there, a couple of significant areas to pick up in there. Should say this week there's various people on holiday this week, which has held progress back a bit. Plus we're actually filming a day earlier this week because there are various people off at the end of the week going to Retro Rise Gathering, which is good. I'm not able to go this year, but it's probably my favourite show of all the shows to go to. It probably is my favourite. It's an absolutely brilliant, laid-back, lovely event to just go, have a beer and have a chat to car people about cars and general rubbish, basically. It's just a great event to go to. I'm going to stop here because Tom's been really busy, as usual, on the Land Cruiser. He's certainly not been twiddling his thumbs. There's a couple of bits I might go into a little bit on this. He's been working on the quarter. We mentioned it last time round when Cal and I did the walk round last week, which was this area, which is now in and joined and pretty much there. He's just working on panel beating it. I'll come back to that in a minute. He's done that. He's now also about to fit a replacement quarter panel, which will tie nicely into what I'm going to talk about panel beating. He's got a full replacement quarter to go on this side because this one is really battered. So that's the replacement quarter panel for the far side of the car. I'm going to put that on top of there. He's had a few trials. He actually had a repair section for this, which he had to extend. Again, you might remember last week. Extended the top, extended the back. The curvature on that replacement panel wasn't correct. Not uncommon, not a massive issue. But it does add a surprising amount of, it's a prime example of where it adds a surprising amount of work to the job. It's the same with this. The curvature, the radius of curvature on that is not correct for the car. You could just put it on and throw it at it and make it half look okay. And for an off-roader, a typical 4x4, it would probably look all right. You wouldn't really notice. But to get it right, it actually needs that radius changing, which isn't the end of the world, because we can shrink this edge, pull that in, and then we can rebend that a little and just squeeze that bend a little bit, and we can change the radius. The problem in changing the radius is it moves to one side or the other in terms of length, which will either alter the fit to the door shut or it'll alter the fit to this shut, which then means potentially having to put a new edge on or split the panel. And that's where a seemingly simple panel swap becomes slightly more complicated. We think we can do it just by squeezing the radius and shuffling things around a little bit and a little bit of trimming, and we can make it all work. But that's where a simple panel swap is actually slightly more in depth than you would think. Coming on to the panel beating, because of that change of curvature, there was a few alterations, and there was a few, with the bits of work involved, plus the welding, you actually set up quite a lot of distortion. These are very flat panels, so it's very easy to distort them when welding sections in. and I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here about welds and panel beating, because I was watching a video, one of the channels I watch on YouTube recently, another very popular car channel that's quite frequently mentioned in our feeds, was where some panel welding was being talked about, and there was a lot of talk about spreading the heat around the welds and welding a tiny bit at a time and trying to spread heat to prevent distortion and things. And it bothers me slightly because that's not actually correct. The solution to that is to remove the distortion by re-stretching the metal. Whenever metal is welded, you're depositing molten steel. In this case, whenever you're welding with steel, you're depositing molten steel at a temperature, say 1500 degrees C. It might be a little bit more, but let's, for the sake of argument, say 1500 degrees C. So you're putting, let's say, a millimetre of steel at 1500 degrees C into a weld section. At 1500 degrees C, that piece of steel might be a millimetre long. When it cools, it'll shrink by the coefficient of expansion of steel, which I can't actually remember what it is, so I'm not going to be able to tell you, but it's a fair bit. It's actually quite a high rate of expansion. When it contracts, it will pull, and that's a fixed thing. You can't do anything about that. No way of depositing that metal will prevent it doing that. It's physically impossible to do anything to stop that happening. You deposit the metal, it gets smaller when it cools. That's simple. Laws of physics. You can't change it. If you do it in tiny bits, every time you deposit a tiny bit of metal, it'll pull and set up a load of stresses. Then you deposit another bit, and it'll pull and set up a load of stresses. Then it'll do that, and every time you do that, it'll cause a shrink, a radial shrink around that point, which will pull that panel. Now you can freeze it in place by putting all those bits of weld in, but it will set up enormous stresses in the panel, which then make it almost impossible to panel beat. Whereas if you do one weld with a TIG welder, depositing a soft material that you can panel beat, and do it in one pass, you create a simple section that you then panel beat. You need to be able to get at it to panel beat it, but you can get with a hammer and dolly, and you can stretch that material back, and you can flatten it out, and the panel will return to exactly as it was. That's the way you do the welding. You put all the weld in, the panel will change shape completely and become an awful shape. It'll completely misshapen at that point because it's all shrunk. You then get your hammer and dolly and you panel beat that back. You beat the steel that's shrunk between a dolly and a hammer, which stretches it, just like you roll that pastry with a rolling pin. You stretch it, goes back to the shape. If you know what you're doing and you're half decent at it, you can then just panel beat that weld all the way back, and the panel will be flat and look exactly like it did before you welded it in, only joined. So that's, sorry to go off on a big tangent, but I thought I'd just put a bit of a correction in there, because this talking about putting little tack welds around things is not correct. Sometimes you have to do it as a bodge. You have to do it as a bodge if you can't get at the back of the panel to panel beat it. So occasionally you need to weld in little sections and tiny tacks around something and freeze it in place and make it impossible to panel beat, because you can't get at it to panel beat it. And there's a very odd occasion when we would have to do that. And at those points, yes, you do tiny little tack welds, and I would call that a bodge. It's a get out of jail way of getting a panel in where you can't get at it to panel beat it. But ideally, what you should do is detach the panel, do the repair where you can panel beat it, and then put it back on, which is what we would normally try and do. Now, Tom's had a slight problem. There's a little bit here which he can't get at to panel beat, so we've got a little bit of a ripple there. We'll be able to get that back. There's a slight low spot there. We can pull that up. There's a slight high spot there which will just shrink down. And there's again, I'm not sure whether to elaborate too much more, but I will just for a minute. The hot shrink that we were going to put on there, I'll go off on another slight tangent now, which is kind of linked into using that. We can actually use that coefficient of expansion and contraction that I referred to when you're depositing weld. You can use that to shape a panel. If you have a high spot, a crown in a panel that you don't want to be there, you can get rid of it using heat. Now, it's very, very common in structural steel industry. Boat builders do it as a matter of course. You weld a deck on a boat, and it ripples and waves all over the place, and they will then use a piece of equipment called a flame straightener to straighten that. They'll go along and they will heat sections of that deck and then let it cool, and by concentrating heat in a very small area, you cause the material to shrink. The way it does that is if I here, for example, if I heat a very tiny spot in the middle of that panel, it has to be a very small spot. If you apply very intense heat to a very small spot, it expands, and it can't expand in any other way other than sideways into the metal around it. If you heat a very small spot, it can't lift and it can't dip because it's restrained by the metal around it. So it expands into the metal around it, and by doing that, it thickens the metal around it. As it cools, the tensile forces it exerts pull that metal in, and rather than thinning it back, they actually pull the metal into a lower condition than it started. And that's what people would refer to as hot shrinking. It's heating very, very, very localized spots so that the material expands into the material around it, can't bulge it or pull it down, can't push it up or down, it just expands sideways into the material, thickens it, and then as it cools, it comes back, doesn't thin it because it's frozen at that point, so it pulls that high spot down, pulls that low spot up, depending on which way you're going. And that's what hot shrinking is referred to. That's a common practice used in bridge making, any structural steelwork, straightening steel beams. It's used for straightening most of the steelwork you see around the world that you might drive your car over, things like that. Most of that will have been hot straightened at some point after it's been welded. That's standard practice. It's not like unbodging something or getting around a problem. It's standard practice on straightening material that's had some work done to it. And it's what we use to take lumps out of panels, and it's a standard practice for straightening things is hot shrinking. On steel, on aluminium you can usually shrink it without the heat, but sometimes you need the heat. But anyway, there's my little aside of metalwork tutorial for today. So we'll wander on at that point before I go off on any more tangents. We'll wander along to the Morris Minor, where I can't really find a very good place to stop, so I'm going to hide around here behind a gas bottle and really annoy Jamie. I don't know if I can shut the bonnet on this actually, possibly. There we go, I can shut the bonnet enough that I can talk over it. There we go, that'll do. You may have noticed before I shut the bonnet, there's no engine in there anymore. That's because Stu's been busy dismantling it. As you'll notice, there's quite a lot missing. He's pulled the front subframe out, which is standard Mazda MX-5 front subframe. He's pulled the front panel, the radiator, the front lower piece that bolts into these tubes here out. He's pulled the engine and gearbox out on the front subframe, and I think he's pulled the rear. Yes, he's pulled the rear subframe out as well. I don't know where it's gone. Somewhere. He's pulled the rear subframe out as well, so that he can then make the rotisserie connections for this, which he's working on at the minute, there being a piece of. He'll be carrying on, there's bits around me somewhere, so he'll have the bits around. He's going to be making the rotisserie mount so we can finish fully stripping all the bits off this car, take the wings off and a few other bits, put it on the rotisserie, spin it round and do all the welding work underneath that we couldn't do while it was on the jig. If you remember going back quite a while now, it was on the Select jig when I built the entire chassis, which would have been around this time last year, built all the chassis on the jig. There's lots of bits of tube work underneath I couldn't get around to weld, so Stu's going to then get this on the rotisserie and finish all the TIG welding work on all the sections underneath that were inaccessible previously, and do various other work. There's a number of other jobs as well. It's not just weld finishing. There's a number of other jobs that need doing from the underside on this car. A lot of plumbing provisions. He's been working on. He's been putting threaded bosses in to mount because at this stage, while it's in bare metal, we put all provisions in for mounting all the fuel lines, brake lines. You'll have heard us talk about this before. Carol will have talked about it as well. But we put all the provisions in for mounting all the fluid lines. So he's been welding the bosses in, or at least tack welding the bosses in underneath, and making the brackets that will then bolt to those bosses to carry quite a lot of lines, because we've got a remote servo in the back on this, so the brake lines are all doubled up. We've got a long vacuum line to run to that. We've got the 2 fuel lines. There's a lot of pipe work to run around the car and not much space. So again, the bracket work's been done extremely neatly underneath to get the pipes to all miss the Mazda PPF that has to still run the power plant frame, as they call it, the big aluminium piece that joins that basically mounts the front end of the diff and the rear end of the gearbox and ties the two together. Because the entire powertrain in a Mazda, if you don't realise, is mounted on 4 mounts. There are 2 diff mounts, 2 engine mounts, and that carries the entire powertrain. There's no rear gearbox mount and there's no diff nose mount. The torque reaction from the nose of the diff in a Mazda MX-5 is reacted to the tail of the gearbox and vice versa. It's a very good way of doing it. It gives you a very direct feel to the driving experience. But anyway, again, gone off on a tangent. He's been routing all the fluid lines to miss that PPF, which is actually quite difficult because it's very tight and we've got an exhaust under there as well and lots of things to get in the way. So it's fortunate that Stu's not got much hair, so he can't really tear it out, so he'll be all right. He's getting on okay with it. So that's where we're at with Morris. So you'll probably see this, well, you will see this upside down next week, which will be quite nice because you'll be able to see all of the engineering in the underside of it, because there's not a lot of Morris there. You'll be able to see all of that laid bare from underneath next week, so that'll be good. I'm just looking at a way around where Jamie's not going to trip over and I'm not going to trip over. I think we'll go this way. It's not new, it's very old and second-hand, but I bought another little TIG welder as well because we were running low on welders. So I bought a little AC/DC single phase TIG that we could use for for doing work around the workshop. I'm going to wheel this sack barrow out of the way. As you can tell, I haven't really done a lot of preparation in here, shall I? I'll stand over here. I'll do a little dance around here. I'll stand on the bridge. I'm going to stand on the bouncy bridge. You can see this hole. You saw me digging this last week. I think, was it last week? Yeah, I think you saw me diggering in here last week. We dug all this out. We put about 150 mil, 6 inches of type 1 aggregate in the bottom, whacker plated all that down. That's all down. We've then poured yesterday, Tuesday, today's Wednesday, yesterday we poured 6 cubic meters of high flow, self-compacting concrete into here, which is like a floor slab concrete that's very easy to get level, hopefully. I think there's a couple of slightly low spots. I'm not the absolute master of concrete laying, so but we got it pretty good. I think it's within about 10 mil over the whole lot, so it'll be accurate enough for what we need. So this is the base for our replacement. I call it new to us, second hand actually, June Air paint booth that's going in. Which will be a full floor extract booth with full floor gridding over the whole floor, so it's nice, even downdraft and no dust problems, hopefully. Full ceiling filter air feed in, full floor extract air feed out. With quad blowers, which are one of the main upgrades we wanted. We were thinking about putting them in the old booth, but the old booth is in the way. That's the main reason for changing round, is the old booth is in the way in the fabrication shop, because that's where it was when it was put. When we only had that place to put it when that was put there. Subsequently, obviously, things have grown and things have changed, and we've now got some more space. So we need to move that one anyway. We wanted the quad blowers for drying water-based. We're now using water-based base coat. We've used solvent-based for a long time. We still do occasionally use solvent-based, but most of the time we're using a water-based base coat for various reasons, one of which is that we had some patchiness issues with solvent-based base coats, which we couldn't seem to resolve. Whatever we did in terms of drop coats and things, we couldn't seem to resolve them. But we found that with water-based, they just weren't there to start with. We never had the problem with water-based. That was one of the key things. And it's just slightly more environmentally friendly and more available, and a number of other reasons. You know, the technology's current rather than old hat, so that there's a wider range of good quality manufacturers of water-based base coats as well. So we're using water-based base coat, but one of the problems there is a lot of time gets wasted in the booth waiting for things to dry. There's a lot of drying time involved, and people get, there's a lot of standing around waiting for paint to dry, basically. One of the benefits with these quad blowers that June Air do, and that other manufacturers do similar things, is they generate a high velocity airstream that you can aim at the sides of a vehicle or whatever. You can aim patches of high velocity air, which makes the water-based base coat dry out faster. So that's one of the other steps forward we want. Plus we wanted to go to low energy lighting, just because the old booth's got nearly 2.5 kilowatts of fluorescent lighting in it, which need changing fairly regularly to keep them at the right colour temperature. And they all, at some point we're going to need to change all of those. There's a fair lump of money in changing that many fluorescent tubes for a start. So we were thinking about going to LED lighting in there. So that's another upgrade. It's another no-brainer. While we're putting the booth in, we go to LED lighting, quad blowers, slightly bigger mixing room, full floor extract, which was the other issue we have in there, is getting dust trapped on bits of floor that aren't grid. So all of that will be solved by going over to this, and it'll mean that we gain the space in the fabrication shop where we need it. Moving rapidly on, because I can see Jarkel's arms are starting to shake. I'll let him move his arms a bit. I'm going to sort of wander in here. Where we've just walked across the plank, and forgive the tip in here at the minute, because it is just, we've got carnage going on. Gaz is having to work around sort of a general mess because we're doing so much work around him. But this will be our new prep area, which is sort of still mid-build, as you can see. Where we've walked through will be a wall. That won't be the access. Behind camera is where the access into here will be when it's finished. There'll be a clear PVC curtain door across there. This will be the prep area. That box over there with the sort of mesh squares on the front, that's an extraction box, which is all going to be piped in yet into the ductwork, and the extraction for that will actually be being removed from the old booth. So that will give us some good dust extraction in here, so that when we blow down, we can keep negative pressure in here, trap all the dust on a filter that we can change really easily because it's at ground level and it's just a standard filter that we can just pull out and change. So we can trap all the dust in here and stop it just venturing off into the rest of the workshop like it does at the moment. So that's a big step forward. We're just sorting out the cladding on the walls. Rich has been working on that, and Rich and Steve have actually been working on that today, getting some, that's plastisol steel cladding that we've just put on that wall. The other wall will be all clad in once the booth construction is done, so we've got a bit more space to work around that side. We'll be cladding that wall in as well. We're going to paint the back wall white, generally spruce it all in here, and then obviously the booth behind us is going, which will then give us the access into here. In the middle of all that and all that talk, here's the 68 Camaro, which we're starting to get properly into the body prep work on. After a couple of false starts on that, we're now getting back into the proper scale body prep on it, which is going quite well. Because we've already had a couple of starts and stops on that, we've already tackled a couple of the problem areas on that, namely the wing to door fits and areas like that. We've already tackled a few of the issues that we knew we had with this car. They're dealt with now, so it's starting to progress sort of reasonably well now. That's Gary. Gary returns. But yeah, we're getting it. We had a bit of a leg up from the work we'd done previously, so things are rolling along okay with it now. Steve's been busy prepping panels, cleaning odd bits of surface rust off, cleaning out corners, generally prepping things for filler work, and then doing the initial light skim work on the wings front panel fit. I know this had been coated with a bit of holding primaries, cleaned that off this front panel, and just done a first skim on that. So long way ahead there, but we're at the first filler stages at the moment, and it should take place reasonably quickly. The delays with this car, I'll be able to say now, are getting all the fits correct around all the multiple pieces that fit together on the front. It's a problem which we had with the Mustang. It's a standard American car, 1960s muscle car thing, is that there's a lot of pressed metal work around the front and rear ends, which doesn't fit amazingly well together. Was made on a budget in a fairly slapdash fashion originally, has probably then been copied a number of times in an even more slapdash fashion since, and consequently none of the fits are amazing and they all take a lot of work to get right. We think they're all pretty good now, but I imagine there's going to be bits we've missed and that we'll need to go back through and improve fits on. So watch this space. You'll be seeing lots of panels going on and off and on and off a Camaro while we get closer and closer to the stage of it being ready for paint. So yeah, that's that. And from this brightly lit, nice body prep space, I think that's about time to sign off for this week. And next week, you'll be able to catch up with where everything's moved on to with Cal next time. Good to see everybody, and I hope you all have fun. See you soon.